In the part of California where I live, there are many oak woodlands that are being developed and turned into properties. This property is no exception. Matter of fact, the first time I was here on this property was 16 years ago, and I was planting 48-inch box trees. I planted about 5 of them. And the reason I was planting more oak trees was because they took out oak trees to build their house. This particular tree is a beautiful example of a wild tree, and it has some real character. I'd like to add that we are working on these trees, but the only work that had been done on these trees was by the owners of this property, the new owners. You can see all the way around, even the adjacent properties, it's oak trees everywhere. These trees were incredibly overgrown. Now this is interesting. This was a completely dead stub that the previous owner cut off, and you can see the dieback. And I want to talk about where to cut it. It's really easy to make a cut that is too big, and we refer to those as flush cuts. This is an appropriate size cut. I don't make it so close that the wound is so large, but I don't make it a prominent stub either. This will start to encapsulate and grow over and contain this wound somewhat. There's the other side of it. Oh boy, did I get lucky. Didn't even see that. I cut this piece off. Those are the other sides of that same branch that I just cut off. This is what the homeowner did, and they left a lot of stubs throughout the tree, or in many cases, they did flush cuts, like that one. That's a flush cut. That is just a little bit too large. Now, if you've studied Shigo's efforts on dissecting trees and seeing what happens when you make improper wounds, you understand that a lot of these old wounds are beginning to rot out quite significantly. And if you make an appropriate cut, it's still going to create some decay. All wounds end up with some decay. But if you understand about the walls of protection, which is often referred to CODIT, C-O-D-I-T, compartmentalization of decay in trees. Now, this was a flush cut, and I want you to look at this closely. That was made 16 years ago when the guy said he did all of his own tree work, and this is hollowing out quite extensively. Even when it closes up, does not mean that the tree is no longer decaying. A lot of people believe that trees heal, and it's important to know that trees do not heal. What they will do is they will grow up and around and surround the wound. In many cases, the wound will slow down, but if you make it too close, it could be really bad. See those 4 pine trees that they planted there? They're Monterey pines, and I told them that that's probably a mistake. And they also did a lot of play structures and tree houses and construction in trees, and there was a big area where they had a zip line that went to another tree. This is interesting. I want you to see that they put a bunch of steps on the trees, and as the tree grew, it pushed the wood out, but the lag screw was kept intact. So that's what caused the wood to become recessed like that. It's actually pushing and pushing and pushing. So interesting. I was able, oh, there we go. That's where there was a zip line that was wrapped all the way around it. I don't know if the cable is still in there or not. So much deadwood. Now, this family has children, and they wanted the children to play in the trees, so they built all kinds of tree houses and tree structures, and as I said, a zip line. And unfortunately, a lot of the damage to the trees is caused by all the stuff that was put in the trees. In many cases, the trees would absorb the wood, or in this case, the trees, as they're growing, are causing the tree house to completely self-destruct. So there's a lesson there in how you build a tree house if you're going to build one. You've got to allow for movement and growth in the tree. I told him, I said, this tree house has got to come down They said that they weren't ready to take it down yet. So I worked on this property last year on some of the trees out in the front of the property, and this year they wanted us to start on some of the trees in the back. I've been slowly working my way through many of the oak trees, and every single tree that I get into, I can see evidence of past homeowner mistakes, stubs, and lots of bad cuts. I want to also talk about the lawn. They've got this large lawn. You see, they have a well, so water is not a problem for them. And because they've got an abundance of water, they can have all this area, and unfortunately, they've got quite a gopher problem. So they're constantly battling the gophers. It reminds me of a scene out of a movie. What was it, Caddyshack? So there's a cut where they used a pole saw and just ripped it and tore all the way down. So I see this throughout the trees. Everywhere I'm looking, I can see evidence of the homeowner mistakes that are leading to pockets of decay. Jorge's a pretty good climber there, and he likes to fly through the trees. He's been with me 28 years. We work well together. You know, we make a good team. There's some evidence of yet another tree house that they put in, and look at that. That was put into a crotch, and the tree is growing up and around this board. We ended up breaking it out of there, but it was damaging the bark significantly. So there we go. There's an area that I pulled a board out of, and it was an ant colony that was forming in this area. So you have to think about what you do. I want to talk a little bit about our brush cart. I know I've talked about it in other videos, but this is a brush cart that I built, I'm going to think about 35, 40 years ago, and we have two of them. But we worked hard at coming up with a design that would work both for wood and brush. And we built this little, we call it a manifold here, that holds 2x4s in different configurations. So it can be wide, it can be straight up and down, or it can be a halfway point, depending upon the size of the gate that you've got to get through. And in this particular property, we make it pretty wide, but we can load it up with so much brush, and then we use that rope there to tie it down. This was a godsend to us. Getting all of this brush out of this property was a long haul. As a matter of fact, the last day on this particular job, I looked at my iPhone where it's got that health app, and I clocked 5.5 miles hauling brush, just hauling brush back and forth from the low part of the property. This is on the third day of the job. So unfortunately, it was down off the edge of the lawn. I started talking a little bit about the lawn, and the lawn means that all of these trees are getting more water than they would normally. So many of the trees that are close to the lawn have grown abnormally large, excessively large. Branches are starting to break. That was part of the reason that we were there. There's a few shots of us getting some of the major deadwood. That one limb right there, once he got the weight out of it, it was a significant difference. Jorge was out on the end of it on the rope, and he said he could feel that it was a solid limb after he got all the weight off, whereas before he felt like it was on the verge of breaking. Mountains and mountains and mountains of brush. It was a hard job. Time for a little break. Found this tree limb here. This native oak woodland was modified from what it's supposed to be. Now there's more water. The trees were cut improperly in many cases, and the changes that have taken place are permanent. Some of these trees are growing far too fast. Hard day, but you know what? I finished up by going over to some friend's house for dinner. Hey, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.